And now I've got the pleasure of introducing Amy. Amy Dockser Marcus is a staff reporter at the Wall Street Journal covering health and science. She covers the intersection of science and society, including a body of work about reproductive technologies and how they're changing how people build their families. She has a master's degree in bioethics from Harvard University, and her work has won many awards, including a Pulitzer Prize. Amy is the author of a recent book about the rise of citizen science and patient-driven research called We the Scientists: How a Daring Team of Parents and Doctors Forged a New Path for Medicine. I find her work fascinating, so I'm thrilled she's here. With that, I give you Amy.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be speaking with you all tonight. I have attended many Monday evening conversations with the speakers that Betsy and her colleagues invite, and I have learned so much and benefited from hearing about people's life experiences, their research, and their advocacy. So I was really touched that Betsy invited me here to talk to you all a little bit about what it's like to be a reporter covering this space. My journey began around 5 years ago when a Wall Street Journal colleague reached out to me. Someone she knew had told her an incredible story about taking a DNA test for fun and a family secret coming to light. The woman now publicly wanted to share her story. Would I be willing to talk to her? I always enjoy speaking with people about their families. The prospect of learning family secrets and talking about unexpected DNA test results was also intriguing. So I immediately said yes. The woman I spoke with was named Julie Lawson. She shared with me that, like millions and millions of Americans, she bought a DNA test in 2016 in order to learn something about her ancestry. Her parents had passed away, and she was curious about where they came from. She persuaded her sister to take a DNA test too. What the sisters learned ended up changing their family and set me on a reporting project that has already lasted 5 years and continues to this day. After Julie and her sister Freda took DNA tests, an unfamiliar name popped up on Freda's list of close DNA matches. The man was someone that neither of the sisters knew, but when they looked him up online, they were struck by how much the man looked like their father. The man also lived close by. Julie reached out to him, and the two sisters soon realized that their father had had an affair and a child that they never knew about. Julie also started to wonder why this half sibling only showed up on Freda's DNA matches and not her own. So she started doing more digging with her genetic matches, and she learned another secret. Their mother had also had an affair, one that resulted in Julie's birth. Julie and Freda were half sisters, not full sisters as they had been raised to believe. The story I ended up writing about the two sisters and the new family they built as they developed a relationship with Freda's half brother and Julie's biological father focused on two issues that emerged from the reporting and have echoed in all the work that has come since. The first was that family secrets are almost impossible to keep. With DNA testing and social media, secrets often come out. The second turns on a question that the two sisters kept asking themselves. What should their parents have told them about their origins? The two sisters had different perspectives on that answer, and I'm happy to delve into how they differed if that's something you're interested in hearing more about later on. The story about Julie and Freda went viral. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of readers wrote to me, sharing their own DNA stories and the ways the results changed their identities, their families, and their feelings. I ended up writing stories about some of these people too. I wrote about a mother who pursued DNA testing for her child, hoping that it would reveal insights into her daughter's confounding genetic illness, but ran into the limitations of what DNA testing can tell us. I wrote about a woman who viewed herself as the family historian, then had to decide whether to keep a family secret or help a stranger who had reached out to her after taking a DNA test and wanted to know more about herself. I wrote about two women who took DNA tests and did research on a common enslaved ancestor and ended up feeling differently about what the story they discovered meant. All of the stories I wrote reveal the complexities of families, how they are formed, how they tell stories about themselves, what binds them to one another. DNA testing entangled people in each other's lives, people who might have remained strangers if the technology had not become so widely available to consumers. One moving story we published in 2020 told the story of Stephen Wald, a lifelong New Yorker on a quest to find out his history. His parents had passed away, and he regretted that he hadn't asked them enough questions about his ancestry. So he took a DNA test to try to learn more. When he got back his results, he was surprised to see names listed of genetic relatives that he had never met. And he realized that relatives he knew that had taken DNA tests and that he expected to see as genetic connections on his father's side of the family were missing from his list. It took some digging, but Stephen eventually learned that his parents had experienced infertility and used a sperm donor in order to conceive him. His biological father was a doctor who had been a regular sperm donor in order to earn some extra money while he went to medical school. Stephen wanted to reach out to the sperm donor's daughter, his biological half sister. He was curious about his biological father, and he wanted to know whether they had anything in common, and he also hoped to get to know his half sibling. One of the issues that Stephen wrestled with was the recognition that, in his quest to find out his own history, he might end up disrupting someone else's life narrative. He struggled with that question. When an individual's right to know essential information about themselves and their origins competes with someone else's right to privacy, who gets to decide? Stephen recognized that no one is ever the sole author of their story. His life intersected with other people's lives. In medicine, a patient's personal autonomy usually takes precedence. If you take a medical test, you get to decide who you want to share your medical information with. Your decision to keep your medical test results or your medical history to yourself can have consequences for other people in your family. In cases involving gene mutations that cause diseases, doctors may suggest or even urge you to share your medical results with your relatives. But in the end, it is up to you to decide. But the principles involving sharing consumer DNA test results are still evolving. When I was researching the story I wrote about Stephen, I interviewed Alondra Nelson, who's a professor at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and who has also written a wonderful book about the social power of DNA tests. She says that DNA tests remind us to think about other people and the way we connect with them. In our interview, she said that some of the questions she weighs when assessing how people share the information are: who else matters besides me in this story? Who else has value? And who else might value this information? People answer those questions in different ways. But Stephen Wald, after thinking about all this, decided that he needed answers. He also wanted to be sensitive to the sister that he grew up with and this new possible half sister that he had never met, but he hoped to get to know. He decided to reach out to the sperm donor's daughter, whose name is Julie. He called Julie and he shared why and how he thought they were connected. Julie was startled. She never knew that her father had been a sperm donor. She said her father was dead, but that she wanted to talk to her mother and she would get back to Stephen. A few days later, she called Stephen back. Her mother confirmed that her father had been a sperm donor and that it was possible she had half siblings. After getting over the shock of Stephen's call and the fact that her parents never told her about any of this, Julie told Stephen that she would like to get to know him. Over the years, they have grown very close. Stephen also introduced me to Karen, the sister that he grew up with. Karen had had no interest in ever taking a DNA test, but after her brother shared his own test results with her, she decided to take a DNA test too. She was very upset to learn not only that the man who had raised them was not her biological father, but that she and Stephen did not share the same donor and therefore were half siblings. When Karen reached out to the children of her sperm donor, they answered a few questions about medical history, but they did not want to create a new relationship with her the same way that Julie had done with Stephen. In the article I ended up writing about them, Karen shared how she sometimes feels jealous of Stephen's new half-sister. All their lives, it had been Stephen and Julie, the two siblings. Now there were three. Where does this leave me? Julie asked. Stephen and Julie, and Stephen and Karen, continue to ask these questions of each other as they navigate their changed families and their lives together. The article ran in February 2020, and shortly afterwards, COVID-19 became a public health crisis. For a while, I, like almost every other health reporter in the United States, focused all of my attention writing about COVID and the terrible toll the disease took on all of our lives. So many people were dying. My editors kept me so busy with COVID-related stories that I did not have the opportunity to continue pursuing the many stories and ideas that readers shared with me after the story about Stephen ran. In 2022, I was finally able to return again to think about some of the issues that Stephen Wald's story had raised. By this point, even more people had taken DNA tests. Many people had discovered that their parents used eggs, sperm, and embryo donors in order to conceive them. Some of these parents had kept these stories a secret for decades or gone to their graves, never telling their children the true story of their origins. In June 2022, Colorado became the first state in the country to pass a law that will give donor-conceived people, once they reach the age of 18, the right to know the identity of the donor if they want that information. The law, which goes into effect in 2025, was driven and shaped by the efforts of donor-conceived people. Some of the donor-conceived people involved in advocating for the law did not learn about their origins until they took DNA tests, just like Stephen Wald had done, and realized that they were not matching with relatives they expected and were biologically related to people that they had never met. I met some of these advocates, and I wrote about the legislative efforts they pursued in Colorado. During the legislative process in Colorado, I got to listen to many different perspectives. Those of parents who had suffered infertility and sought out donors in order to conceive children, LGBTQ couples who wanted to have children with the partners they loved and needed donors in order to do this, donor-conceived adults who were seeking crucial medical information about themselves and also had questions about their identities, not to mention the viewpoints of sperm and egg and embryo donors and many others who attended hearings or submitted testimony about their life experiences. Hearing the deeply personal stories that people shared, meeting advocates, spending time with parents, all helped inform my reporting on these crucial issues. Today, I remain deeply interested in how states may or may not change laws to create a path for those who are donor conceived or adopted to learn the identities of their biological parents. In addition to DNA testing, I also write extensively about how fertility technologies such as in vitro fertilization, or IVF, are changing the way people build their families. I and many of my colleagues continue to cover the ongoing debates over the legal future of IVF, whether and how it will remain available to people who need to use it, What kind of additional regulations, if any, will be implemented in the fertility industry, and the intersection of adoption, donor conception, and future ways of creating families that scientists are still working to develop. I think these stories are among the most important that reporters can cover. I know from the hundreds and hundreds of emails that I get every time I write about these topics that our readers think so too. All of us are, or were part of, families. Many of us are building families or hope to do so in the future. Our families include people with whom we share genetics and those we do not, people with whom we were raised, and people who did not grow up in our homes, people who became family because we chose them, or we fell in love with them, or we became intertwined with them for many different reasons and in many different ways. Whenever I report and listen to and write these stories, I always think back to how the researcher Alondra Nelson framed the discussion. Who else has value? Who else matters besides me? It's an honor to write about the people asking these questions and those who continue to seek answers. These are the thoughts that I wanted to share now. Um, I hope I'd love to have a conversation with you all. I'm happy to answer questions. And also, I did want to put out there that if you want to reach me privately, if you have questions about my work or you want to share your stories or just some of the experiences that you've had, not necessarily to write about them, but just even to talk about them, you can not only ask me tonight, but you can also feel free to reach out to me. My email address I'm happy to share with you. It's amy.marcus@wsj.com. And Betsy also knows how to reach me. So with those remarks, I wanted to thank you all for being here and listening to me. And I'm happy to continue the discussion any way that you all, want to.
Thank you, Amy. It's really great. We've got a small group this evening, so for people who are typically on our Monday evenings, we usually do the question and answer through chat, but I want to invite you to go ahead and raise your hand using Zoom if you want to, or just wave at me. And if you want to come off mute and come on camera and pose a question, that's fine too this evening. I do want to just share that Adoption Network Cleveland has our lobby day tomorrow. We'll all be in Columbus with about 30 volunteers talking to many of the Ohio legislators. And one of the topics we're talking about is donor identification going forward. So hopefully Ohio will follow in Colorado's path. I know there's a lot of people working hard in several different states to see who will come in and be second on that. And I certainly hope that Ohio is on that list. I think it's interesting that you kind of pose that ethical framework a little bit, but you also talked about even people who were related in the same scenarios not agreeing on, what's important to tell or when people should tell or how they should tell. So I think this is a very difficult topic to have an ethical framework that it's all subjective, right? So even if you're asking yourself those questions in that framework, then different people with the same scenario or similar will come up with different answers, much like an adoption as well. Kelly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, thanks.
Yeah. So, as I'm sure you're aware, Amy, there are, I can't remember the exact number, but several European countries and I believe Australia that have banned anonymous sperm donation. The United States has not banned anonymity, but anonymity can never be guaranteed when you have commercial DNA testing, as you know. So it's like the laws in donor conception have not kept up with the science, kind of like with adoption. I'm an adoptee. I think many of us here are probably adoptees or in the adoption constellation somewhere. So I think that, as you've probably come to see in your research, this is a very profit-driven industry, and the ASRM makes guidelines, but the fertility industry doesn't have to follow these guidelines. There's some pretty famous donor conceived people like Laura High on TikTok raising a lot of awareness about this. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on whether or not you think the donor conceived activists who are trying to get the laws changed to ban things like anonymity, to put laws in place to regulate the number of times a given donor can be used, are making headway.
Thanks for that question. And you know, you raise a really important issue, a number of them. I think that the Colorado law passing is an indication that advocates are making a difference, because the people who sort of drove that law and advocated on behalf of it and helped lobby on behalf of it were largely donor conceived individuals themselves. And so without their advocacy, it seems unlikely that it probably would have passed. So I think that's, obviously evidence that advocates can make a difference. Of course, other countries have done different things than we have, and there's a lot of reasons why. But I think in terms of my role as a reporter, what I sort of see from my reporting is that donor conceived activists and advocates are continuing to push forward with efforts to pass legislation. And as Betsy mentioned, a group of donor conceived advocates are working, with this group to advocate in Ohio. And so I don't have any special insights on whether they'll be successful or not, but I certainly look forward to continuing to chronicle their efforts. And they've shown in the Colorado example that they can get legislation passed.
Thanks. I'm intrigued with all things birth certificates. That's an issue that I've been deeply involved in for so many years. And there's been more and more conversation about making birth certificates more honest or more transparent in these complex situations. And so instead of having, which I think every state has, a birth certificate that has two parents, and until recently, a male and a female parent, opening up birth certificates, which I do believe some other countries do, to have genetic parents, adoptive parents, surrogate parents, different people reflected. Has any of that come up in your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, it's come up in my reporting in the sense that, I know that it's a debate and it's one that I find fascinating and important. I think that so much of parentage, like there's the legal parentage. This is what I learned as I was reporting, has so many comes with so many responsibilities and requirements. If you are a legal parent, you are responsible for, financially supporting a child, educating a child, feeding a child. It has a legal sort of definition and legal requirements and responsibilities. And then there's also parentage in the daily work that's done. And so many people I interview consider people their parents in the full definition of the word, the people who love me, the people who are there for me when I'm sick, the people who get up at 3 o'clock in the morning when I call them. Some of those people aren't their legal parents, but they are their parents. And so, I think that you've touched on like the heart of it and why there's so much debate over it, because this legal definition and what people feel in their lives sometimes they are the same thing and sometimes they're not the same thing. But I do think it's going to continue to be a very big story. Like, it's a very important issue.
Yeah, I get the thing about legal parents or social parents, but it is called a birth certificate. And so, the people that gave birth to you or, your genetic parents, feels to me that they would have a place as well. Marcy?
Yeah, I was actually gonna speak to what you just said, Betsy. There is that third group of the biological parents. So this type of birth certificate that Betsy's advocating for, maybe, at least investigating, that would list all the parents, meaning the biological and the adoptive, perhaps step parents as well. You know, that would be something to look into. But specifically having the biological parents on a long form birth certificate, even if the child is legally adopted, would be very beneficial for things like what I'm trying to achieve is dual citizenship to Italy. So right now, I am from a state that has access to original birth certificates. However, my birth father's not on there, and it's a non-certified copy. So most states that are passing these laws are issuing non-certified copies, which does not pass muster when it comes to trying to get dual citizenship to Italy. So I would be eligible under Italy's laws for dual citizenship, and I would be eligible under the US's laws for dual citizenship to Italy, had I had a certified copy of a birth certificate with my birth father's name on it, because he is my path to citizenship in Italy. So this is just one example of the things that are closed to adoptees who, you know, and donor conceived individuals who would also be eligible, because Italy's system is through blood. So if you have Italian ethnicity, you're eligible, but they do not accept DNA tests. You have to have a paper trail, and you have to have a legitimate, sorry for the use of the word legitimate, but you have to have a legitimate legal paper trail showing that. So this is just one of the many reasons why access is important. Access to a certified copy is important, and this long form birth certificate is a great idea. I wonder, you know, have you seen this? Have you heard about other or this particular barrier that I'm speaking about, Amy?
I have never written about this topic, but I think I've interviewed advocates who would like to have more than two parents listed on a birth certificate. I've never written specifically an article about it. I guess one question I'd ask you is, are you or anyone else who would like to change the way the birth certificate is done, are you gaining traction? Are there places like, so I don't, like, I have lots of personal opinions on lots of topics, but I don't like get into them. Like, I don't feel that's my role, like as a reporter. As a reporter, I like to listen to what people are experiencing. I learn from them, and I try to learn as much as I can and then try to write a story about it, you know. And so like, I am intrigued about the idea that people would like to have more parents listed, all their parents listed on a birth certificate. But as a reporter, I would say, are there places that are open to this? Are there places where you've advocated and you see that you're gaining traction in achieving this?
So I would say, again, like Betsy mentioned, in other countries, this has been implemented in a few other countries. What I would say is it's almost like the cart before the horse, or a circular argument, in the sense that a lot of times when people are canvassed or there's an article about it in the press, then all of a sudden there's a debate about it. So without the coverage, it's just kind of like this, you know, pie in the sky idea that's happening elsewhere. But perhaps getting an article about it, you know, and highlighting the barriers that adoptees have, not just a long form birth certificate, but just not having a certified copy of my original birth certificate, places me in at a disadvantage as a U.S. citizen. So I just, you know, that's one that's been reported on a lot, but the citizenship, the dual citizenship question, I don't think is out there as much. So just planting a seed.
Oh no, and I'm happy to talk offline with you, you know, more if you want to reach out. I guess I just one more sort of follow up, because I'm curious. So do you know the identity of your biological father and the fact that he's Italian because this was revealed to you by your parents that, you know, that raised you? Like, they told you all this information even though he's not listed, or you've met your biological mother and she shared with you his identity, or this is through DNA testing?
So I reunited with my birth parents about 33 years ago, And my birth father and I, are in relationship. And I also do have DNA evidence that shows that he is indeed my birth father. And yeah, so.
It's
So-
super interesting.
Sorry. I was going to say, interestingly, and Marcy, we touched on this for a moment at the conference, and we should talk more about it, but we have someone in Ohio that got her original birth certificate after our records opened 9 years ago. And when her birth father was not listed on it, but when she met her birth mother, she gave this adoptee the identity of her birth father, and she since connected with him. He's an Italian citizen, and she's advocating for this law. She was told by the Italian consulate, I think, that it doesn't need to even be a certified copy, but if he was listed on her original birth certificate, even if it's the closed copy that only she has access to, that would be good enough for them to move forward making her a citizen. That's actually one of the topics we're talking about tomorrow on Lobby Day. And we've got some language written, in the process of being written, to be introduced for a law in that here in Ohio. So I know, Marcy, you're a different state, so that wouldn't help you, but hopefully if one state did it, then others would see the wisdom. I don't know my famous last words. I don't know if there'll be a lot of opposition to it. It doesn't seem, I don't know, it's kind of a little niche topic. So, it's really important to the people it's important to, but it's not like the floodgates are going to open. There's going to be a million people doing it, I don't think.
I have a question for you,
It's
Betsy.
just one of many examples. Sorry. Yep. Go ahead. Amy.
Oh, no, I have a question for both of you, which is, and this may be a silly question, but like for someone like Marcy, who, is in a relationship with her birth father and he's open to all of this, are you allowed to add the name of a birth parent, 33 years or whatever later type of thing? Like if they all agree?
That's
In
the
most
problem.
states,
That's what we're trying to get Ohio to do. So Ohio, and it sounds like New Jersey or other states, don't have a mechanism to do that. So when this adoptee, her name is Trisha, when she contacted me, she had tried to get it done a few different ways, and the state was agreeable to do it if there was a mechanism to do it. But there wasn't. And so what we're doing is getting a bill written that the birth father would have to agree. The court wouldn't do it, for someone that wasn't in agreement. And they would have to show genetic testing. But then upon their request, he could be added to that original sealed birth certificate that she can access and then supply as a document to the Italian government.
yeah, and I was gonna say, like, this is like a state by state issue, and also there's so there's the original, which for many people is their only. There is a vehicle for adding, like, Amy, if you discovered it was a different father and you wanted to add the father, you can do that. But because mine is kind of like not my legal birth certificate, it's I was granted access, but just kind of out of the kindness of their heart, right? So there's no vehicle for me to add my birth father to my original birth certificate. There probably would be to my amended birth certificate, but not my original that I'm aware of in New Jersey. But I should probably double check that, but I'm pretty sure there is not.
I think the three of us should talk more after this program, and I'll introduce you to Trisha, who's, hot on the trail of this as well.
That'd be great.
So maybe that will be one of the things that will bubble up and get some traction in different states.
And just to say, this also applies to folks who are donor conceived. So it's not just adoptees with original birth certificates. It's also donor conceived individuals that have, falsified, for lack of a better word, original birth certificates that could potentially be eligible as well.
Yeah, and that would be the same in some ways and different in others. I think that might be a heavier lift. I'm not sure. So
I think,
what
Amy,
other questions do people have?
well, I don't necessarily have a question as much as a comment and an appreciation, Amy, for the work that you're doing. And you know, how just how important it is for really revered publications and sources to be writing about this. I think so many of us that have been working on these issues for 30 plus years, when a publication as big and mainstream as the Wall Street Journal is dedicating space and time, I mean, we really appreciate the difference that it makes, and just can't emphasize that enough. I'll chime in about, a bit of my own story is being an adopted person, and, like so many of us here and at so many places, just wanting, a truthful birth certificate, and, just feeling like, how can this not be, or how can the birth certificate we have not say amended or adoptive, or, whatever the case may be. But to be, we're just wanting truth and transparency, and what we choose to do with that, like everybody else, whether we get a open door or don't choose to do anything with it. At some point the pendulum swings to an adult human who has all kinds of, rights to make a decision about our own life, with whatever consequences that brings. And for me, when I found my original family and my birth mother had died, my maternal grandparents said she tried and tried to find you at the same time I was trying and trying to find her. And, we missed each other. And, those kinds of stories are all over the place. But it's just so tragic when people are trying to get across secrets. Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss, and thanks for sharing some of your story tonight too. It's we can't write stories if people don't want to share their stories, and it's very brave to share a story. I'm always deeply admire all the people that I've spoken to for being open to sharing, to putting their story in the world. That's, you don't know how it's going to help someone, or if it's going to touch someone, or in what way. So I appreciate everyone, the advocates and the people who share their stories very much.
It's kind of a segue to another question that I had. Amy, in your kind of prepared remarks, you talked a little bit about people who might have remained strangers over time. But we all know there's some very large sibling groups. There's, typically in donor conception situations, people are living in the same community and they're in the same age group, and sometimes there's a lot of them. And, that's maybe a harder story to tell. I've seen a few stories in the media about people that meet and maybe become romantically involved with one of their siblings. But that's an even harder story to go public with, I think, for many people. So I wondered if that's something that you've run across in your reporting.
Yeah, yes, I have. I've met so many advocates at this point that I feel like I've heard a lot of different stories, including those of large sibling groups, and people who, overlapped with each other or even knew each other and didn't know that they were related. Um, when the stories that we work on are they're so intense and they take such a long time to report. And usually it requires people to be open on all sides to sharing a story. So, we don't always get to report on everything that's happening. We make choices depending on who's feels comfortable, sharing their story. And that makes a big difference. And certainly in this Colorado law, the issue that you raised did come up because one of the components of the law is that there should be a family size limit. And in Colorado, it's the same donor can only be used for a limit of 25 families. That's the goal of this law. That doesn't mean 25 children, because people can have more than one child inside a family. You could still end up with a fairly large group of potential, half siblings. But certainly, I think family limits is definitely one of the issues that the advocates that I interview raise and are seeking to try to address in some of the laws that they're hoping to pass.
See?
Yeah, I again, I'm going to piggyback on you, Betsy. So I'm glad you brought this up. It feels to me, and I'm working on with a group of people in Texas on legislation, and to open original birth certificates for adoptees. So, but it feels to me like just the fact you don't even need to identify two folks that are romantically involved, that are siblings or cousins or whatever, to report on it, because I don't know, my feeling is that the fact that the possibility exists, the fact that it's even possible, it feels cruel and unusual to do this to people in our culture. So like growing up myself, I knew that I was adopted, in and around the area where I was born. And so I was always fearful that I would, date someone who I was related to. And again, it doesn't have to be siblings. It can be first cousins. It can be an aunt or an uncle. I have an aunt who's a year and a half older than I am. So like for so many of us, the fear is really real that, and maybe, I don't have a story that says that I did do that I did unfortunately have that happen to me, but living with that fear coming into adulthood as an adopted person, let alone as a donor conceived person. I feel like there's some room in there to cover that story without, finding those folks who are willing to share, the details of their personal relationships. Because this is something that adoptees have been talking about for generations, and donor conceived folks, are very well aware as well. So thanks for bringing that up, Betsy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate everything you're saying. And, certainly all the points that you and Betsy have made are ones that many people, raise with us. I think that there's many ways for people to share stories. Um, Many advocates write their own stories. That's always a possibility too for people. They write editorials or op-eds in newspapers. They, go online. The Wall Street Journal is obviously one place where stories, where we welcome stories and we're open to talking to people. We've done, in addition to our stories, we also have done roundups where people who wrote letters to us sharing their own stories in response to our stories, we then went and did another story about them to try to include diversity of experiences that we weren't able to get into like the first story. So like I agree with you that the more stories that get out there, the better, because these stories are powerful and they're so important and people want to share their stories. But I commend you for doing that. And I think it's amazing. But yeah, like just wanted to throw it out there back to you that like there's so many ways for you and other people to share their stories, even if it's not in the confines of an article in the Wall Street Journal. And people like me read all those stories and really value them.
Yeah, I've written a few op-eds. Thanks for that.
That's fabulous.
Who
I'm
else has
curious.
questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I'm curious if you are covering, I hear you're covering the Colorado law and, looking into that. And I'm curious if there are other state initiatives. For instance, I think Marcy referenced what's been going on in Texas, and I was a part of that advocacy for original birth certificates and some other, even very minor ethical things to clean up some adoption practices in Texas 25, 30 years ago. And here we are, at this day and age, still working on it, legislation, year after year. And I'm curious if you get involved in some of the particular just statewide history and advocacy.
I mean, I'm not against doing that. I mean, I'm always open to telling any story. For us, look, every newspaper is different too. So this is not an across the board type of thing, but our paper has focused more on stuff that's happening in the moment. And like you said, it could be in the moment fixing something from 25 years ago. I mean, we never rule out any story. It's just we have focused primarily on things that are happening in the moment. I am a health and science reporter, and so I have a different framework than, for instance, our Washington, D.C. bureau, which covers more like legislation, including legislation that's related to fertility issues, IVF, and some of the reproductive rights things. Like from the health and science perspective, I have focused a lot on how technologies have ended up having impact on people's lives. That's kind of the way I came into it. So like I write about IVF. And so what does that mean when you have IVF? Like, there can be a whole diversity of stories that we end up doing. How does that reshape your family? Often it can involve a donor, not only. I've written about DNA testing because it's a technology that is so pervasive and has changed, how people find out information. So we do have reporters based in these big states, and they might write about like a legislative effort that they think is important. And I may too, depending on if it intersects with my beat. It's just, again, there's sort of many different ways to get to a story, and it's complicated how newspapers divide up their reporters and their resources and how they cover things.
Thank you.
Yeah, but feel free to reach out if there's things you think we're missing, because I welcome hearing from people if there's things that we should be covering that we aren't covering. I always welcome hearing your thoughts.
Lisa?
Hi, couldn't find the hand there for a minute. Hi, thank you so much. This is so interesting. I'm an adopted person, and I have a question. If you're a health reporter, have you spent any time investigating and then reporting on the trauma that is experienced? I would say always, because when you are separated from your biological family, or donor conceived, you're missing a lot. You miss that genetic mirroring. When I found my birth family at the age of like 45, so 45 years without anything, I walked like my mother, I talked like my mother, I moved like my mother. My mother, all of my parents are deceased, and I express my birth mother more than any of the other. I didn't never met my father, but I mean, right now you're looking at a product of my birth mother, not my adoptive parents, whom I loved. They were good people. But I don't really express them. So, I mean, there's a trauma with all of that. I experienced it. Every adoptee I've ever known, including my brother, experienced it. So as a health reporter, do you talk about that?
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate you sharing your story too. So I'm trying to think. In my stories, I write about traumas that people experience because they share them. They share their life stories with me, and their life story involves trauma. I have not done a story about trauma as a medical or scientific issue. I think it's a really important one. And it's just that the way our health coverage is, we are focused very much on telling stories through people's lived experiences. So we'd be more likely to write about people's trauma as we're writing about them, rather than, a scientific story about trauma. That doesn't mean it's not an important story. It is. The science of trauma is very important. That's not how we've typically covered the story. But again, that doesn't mean that it's not a great story and an important story.
I mean, can you pitch it? Because, it's if you want to be a really relevant part of this conversation and change, then I just don't see how we leave that out. Look, anecdotes are great. I mean, I've got 10 stories here of happy adoptees. I've got 100 stories here of unhappy adoptees, blah, 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 blah. I mean, anecdotes. What about the real science behind what happens to an infant who is removed from its mother, perhaps minute one? So I would just encourage you, invite you, if you will, to think about, see if maybe the Wall Street Journal will let you do a story on that, because we need that information. Because again, the problem is, and I know you know this, with mainstream media in TV shows and all, how adoption and even now donor conception more recently is portrayed. It's funny, it's this, it's that, the jokes. And so we're really we struggle, those of us who live it, to have the actual truth of what we experience. And again, anecdotes are fine, but it's not enough. And so we need a balance. So anyway, that's it. I would just love for you to consider that.
I'm very open to all ideas. I really appreciate it. And we can chat again later too. Happy to talk more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just for everyone here, I'm putting a link in the chat. We do a survey with all of our programs to see what your thoughts are and what future topic ideas you have as well. So that's the link for that. Amy, there was a question up in chat earlier about where do you see reporting going next? Are there things that you're working on now or that you see as the natural evolution of some of the work?
That's a great question. So I go where the news takes me, so right now I have done recently quite a few stories involving IVF, because in Alabama, with the cases of the embryos that, were destroyed and all the repercussions that happened, I was assigned to cover that. And I did do a story about, a couple of stories related to that. So I continue to follow all of these topics, and as more news happens, as laws are brought forth, as things are passed or not passed, I think that's where we're headed. I'm really open to hearing people's stories. I like I said, I'll go where the news is. And that's, so that's really how we've approached it. So that's how it's been so far this year, mainly kind of IVF reporting, but we'll see what happens as the year unfolds.
Thank you. Just for people who might not be familiar with some of Amy's recent work, I jotted down a few of the headlines of things she's worked on just recently. One, a sperm donor chases the role in the lives of 96 children that he fathered. One that I told her I was intrigued. What if men could make their own egg cells? New technologies giving people that might not have otherwise been able to have children. The pull of knowing your origins is hard to ignore. What makes a family? Advocates debate importance of biological ties. 2 children learn the truth about their donor father and build a new family. Parents of donor conceived children face new calls for candor. So a lot of what came up this evening, but then some further flowing issues as well. Thanks. So we have time for maybe one more question, then I'm going to wrap things up. Is there anybody with anything burning? Okay. So thank you for attending this evening, and thank you so much, Amy, for generously sharing your time and your deep expertise and all of your thoughts with us. We really appreciate it. For people who are regulars at the series or want to become regulars or come to more things. Next week, we have Abandon a Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me, which is a book by Janet Sherland, the author speaking. And then May 20th, which I think is the week after that, is Grandmothering While Black, about kinship care. After that, we are taking a break for the summer months. And so we'll be back in September, where Ty and I are furiously scheduling things for September. So it's a good time to submit any ideas or wish list items that you have. Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We serve individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. And we are a membership-based organization. We invite all of you to join us. And I think I've already posted our website enough, but you can see more at our website, which is adoptionnetwork.org. So thanks for coming this evening and spending your time with us.
Thank you, everyone. I
Take care.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks so much.